All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get the meeting officially underway, I'm going to make available an opportunity briefly here. If there are any questions that relate to the agenda tonight, now would be a great time to bring those forward. Oh, what a silent bunch. Okay, very good. So with no further ado then, let me call our council meeting for November 4th to order. And the first item of business is the adoption of the minutes of the council meeting held October 10th, 2013. Moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Powell Davidson. Are there any errors or omissions of those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor, opposed, and that's carried. Thank you. Now moving on to the next set of minutes, and again I'm going to need a motion that the minutes of the Town Hall Council meeting held October 21st, 2013 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Powell Davidson, seconded by Councillor Greir, and again, are there any errors or omissions? I will briefly chat about that meeting under new business tonight. All right, so seeing none, all in favor, opposed, and that's carried. Thank you. Now we're up to the point where we approve the agenda. There is going to be one change for members of council. They're not aware. Our Director of Finance is a little under the weather, so he's not able to be here this evening. So what I'm looking for is that we make a motion that the agenda item 5A regarding the 2013 budget variance report for the months ended September 30th, 2013 be removed from the agenda and deferred to the November 18th, 2013 council meeting, and that the November 4th, 2013 council meeting agenda be approved as amended without that item. So Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Lefebvre. Any discussion? Any other additions or anything? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. Okay, that's moving us right along into our delegations phase of this meeting tonight. And we have 3 delegations this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Without further ado, I'm going to ask for the first group to come up, and that would be the Parksville Downtown Business Association, and this is regarding the 2014 Renewal of Business Improvement Area. So ladies, you've been in those chairs many a times now, and I think you know how this works. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for inviting us here tonight. As you're aware, twice in the past 8 years, the property owners in the downtown core have chosen through a petition process to pool resources to make the downtown a better place to do business through the Parksville Downtown Business Association. And we think it's working. Since the business improvement area was established, there's been a lot of changes. There's renewed energy, there's more activity downtown. We have 4 new buildings on Weld Street alone. We have the new construction at Hearst Avenue and Alberni Highway, and at Corfield Street in the highway, and the facelift on the building at Bagshaw in the highway. So the downtown is really booming right now, and we're excited about it. There have been several facade improvements as well, spread throughout the downtown, including paint and signs and all that. So over the years, we've, as you're aware, we've provided planters and garbage cans. We've provided physical labor to clean up gardens and eyesores. We continue to fund the clean team from Padacle, who pick up all the litter in the downtown core. We add color and definition of the downtown through our street banners and with the sculpture that we dedicated to the city. I say 2010, but I'm not positive on that one. In 2012, a new approach to strategic planning defined 4 bold steps that the PDBA would take to reach our goals for the BIA. Everything we do is checked against that plan to make sure we stay focused and create results for our property owners and our businesses. While our visitors are important, we believe that contributing to a feeling of pride of place and encouraging local commerce is a key to a year-round thriving economy. So our 4 bold steps that we chose were to be the marketing agent for Parksville Downtown. And by doing this, and one of our ways of doing this is through our Christmas advertising. We have pop-up trees that I think we've got 5 so far that we put in on the roofs of the buildings. We have an Our Town series that's been running in the PQB News. We have lifestyle ads in the Oasis magazine, and I'm sure you've seen most of this. We've got radio campaigns for events. We've had projects like the free bus. We have Paint What Matters downtown. And in 2013, we created a TV commercial, and we have another one coming out in 2014. So we're really excited with our marketing for the downtown. We have a state-of-the-art website and an online business directory. Our analytics for our website show that in just 18 months since it was created, our website outperforms every other website in this area. It is so well optimized that if you search for anything Parksville, you will come to us first. So our website is just phenomenal. We're really excited about the analytics we're getting from that. Our second bold step was to formalize our stakeholder relationships. That not only includes our relationship with the city, which we accomplished with our Memorandum of Understanding last year, but we also have a strong, cooperative, productive relationship with our community partners, and that enables us to leverage the contributions of our volunteers and get more things done. Our third bold step was to increase member engagement. We're in regular contact with our members. We keep them updated on all our activities. We try to keep them updated on city activities. We have a strong board that represents both the service sector and the retail sector, which is a little unique for BIAs. We've found that most BIAs have a huge retail sector on their board, but not so much a service sector, because we've also found that like 45% of our businesses in the downtown are service sector businesses, which is a little bit different than a lot of downtowns as well. And we stay up to date on national, international practices in downtown revitalization, which brings us to our fourth bold step, which is to be the lead in downtown revitalization. We've learned over the past 7 years that revitalization is not just about bricks and mortar changes. It's as much about changing hearts and minds and attitudes. You do that by staying positive and focused. And we are. Getting anything of value accomplished requires leadership, and we think that we provide that. In the past year alone, 22 new businesses and our owners have chosen Parksville downtown as their home. People of Parksville care about downtown. And want it enhanced. And that was very evident in the OCP meetings that we attended. They made it clear that the downtown was important. And Bylaw 1453, which is your city bylaw, which enables the BIA to exist, and for us, the Parksville Downtown Business Association, to administer it, expires at the end of 2014. As you're aware, the funding of the BIA is 100% paid for by the property owners of Parksville Downtown. We receive no public money to carry out our work. PDBA was first established in 2007 by way of a petition process and was renewed again in 2009 with the same petition process. This process requires that we obtain written approval of 50% of the property owners, representing 50% of the value of the properties within the BIA area. We are respectfully requesting tonight that the renewal for the BIA for 2014 be done by a council initiative, as allowed under the local services area section of the community charter. 98% of business improvement area renewals in BC are handled in this way. Nanaimo has had BIAs for more than 24 years and has always completed renewals in this manner. Once we have confirmation from the city on our renewal process, our next steps will include development of a comprehensive communication program to inform our members of the process and the requirements. Thank you for your consideration of this request, and we would be pleased to answer any questions at this time.
All right, thank you very much. So we will do just that, and I'll open the floor to members of council. I saw Councillor Paul with her hand up first.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much for your presentation. I just want to be clear now. If you have to go out with the process that you have now, when do you have to start doing that survey?
Tomorrow.
Okay, and so if you have to do it tomorrow, what I'm looking at is timeframes, because this runs out at 2014, you said, at the end of 2014?
Yeah. The last renewal we did in 2009 took us approximately 7 months from the time we started to when we got all the signatures that we needed, and then it took another 2 months to go through the city process, so it was a 9-month process. That's why I'm saying we'll start planning tomorrow if we had to.
And so from the city, if for this new way of doing it, what did you call it, the council initiative?
Yes.
When would you need that by?
It has to be approved by the end of December or through the process. I would think that I think it would take the city 4 to 6 months to do their process. I'm not sure. That'd be something we'd work with staff on, I think. The process is different for the city than it is for us, because we have to get positive responses, and when the city does it, it's negative responses.
So maybe on that moment, I'll ask Mr. Manson if you could just shed some light on a council initiative for the benefit of everyone here and what that actually entails.
Thank you, Your Worship. The difference between the two, as Michelle has outlined, with a petition to council, the petitioners are required to come to council with 50% of the property owners who have 50% of the assessed values signing on saying that, yes, they're in agreement. If it's a council initiative, we send out letters to all of the properties that are involved, and unless 50% of the properties with 50% of the assessed value say that they don't want it, then it would go forward. So that's basically the difference. It's substantially easier for us to do it in that the onus is on the property owner to respond back, versus with the BIA, the onus is on them to go to the property owner to get the property owner to agree. So that's basically the difference.
And so if that were an option that council wanted to pursue this evening, what kind of a motion would be required to get that underway? A motion directing staff to initiate a council initiative for the renewal of the business improvement area. Okay, thank you. Other members of council, so who is first? All right, Councillor Greir and then Councillor Lefebvre.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Thanks very much for your presentation. Do you feel it's easier for council to do it that way than for the business community?
Yes. What we've found in the past when we've done it our times, if we have to get 50% of the property owners to say yes, and as you're aware, it's easier to get people to say no than it is to get people to say yes. And if there's 3 or 4 people on title to the property, you have to have more than 50% of them sign. So if 4 people own a piece of property, then 3 of those people have to physically sign the petition and return it.
So have you had problems with this in the past? Obviously you haven't, have you?
Yeah, we have. And sometimes it's just getting that 4 signatures. Sometimes it's because people are out of town, can't accept fax signatures. We've always done it. It's a time-consuming process. And this year, for the first time, we have the beach club. Each one of those units has a commercial portion to it. Some of them are only $200, but there's 4 owners on those, or 6 that I've found. And there's like 5 pages of owners just for the beach club, but because they have a small portion of commercial zoning, they would be considered part of our pool.
So by the city doing it, what you're asking us to do is come in with the big hammer.
No, we're not asking you to come in
No.
with a big hammer. We've done this twice already.
Right.
We've been in place for 7 years now. This will be our 8th year finalizing this year. It's not something new. It's something that they've agreed to twice already. We found, in doing our research, we found like places like the city of Courtenay, their downtown business improvement area doesn't expire. They don't have an expiration date on theirs. Nanaimo's, like we said, have been doing the renewals in this manner for the last 24 years. Victoria does their renewals in this manner as well.
So if we do it, then we don't have an end date on it.
No, the bylaw is something different. We could elect not to have an end date, or we could work with staff and do the same thing we've done this year as a 5-year period. That's something we'll have to work with staff and come up with what the proposal is.
Thank you.
Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for your presentation. Refresh my memory, please. When you've gone to do this in the past on your own, you've had no problems to speak of. You've always had a significant majority.
We've always had a majority. I don't know if it's been significant. It's been, 60% certainly. The last time in 2009 when we went back to our records, we only had 4 property owners that came out and said no.
Out of how many?
236. 4 said no.
Okay.
The rest of them, it was just getting them to sign the papers and get them back to us.
Thank you.
We only had 4 that actually said no.
So the batting average is a good one. Just a comment. You talk about 22 new businesses in town, and my neighbor the other day, I don't think I have to name the restaurant. My neighbor the other day said there's this brand new restaurant that's open on Well Street. Well, it's not brand new, but it's fairly new. And I went there, and the place was just jammed. Didn't have reservations, had to wait. People were very, very popular place. You might know who it is, but I don't feel I have to name the place, but it was quite amazing. It's a very neat place to eat. So congratulations, good work.
I don't see this as a concern coming from you folks that you would have a hard time getting the yeses. It's just a concern about the tremendous amount of workload that it takes for you and your staff to ultimately go through that process, which is work that you're not available to be doing in the downtown for some of the things that are initiatives.
It takes up a big chunk of our budget to do this and time.
And I can't think of one occasion that I had a downtown business owner, or property owner rather, come to me with a concern about the BIA. And I can say that truthfully. I can't recall one single time. Go ahead, Councillor Paul Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a comment plus 2 questions. The first is a comment in regards to Michelle's addressing the bold steps. And thanks for the presentation. That was very well presented and clear and concise. You talked about the TV commercial, and I have to say I saw that this year, and I was just blown away. I thought that was an incredibly impressive piece of work. So congratulations to that and all the other accomplishments. My question is probably, Your Worship, through you to staff. First question would be, why do we have an expiration date? It seems to me that it would be a lot easier for everybody included if there was no expiration date on this agreement, and incorporate a rule or a bylaw or what have you, where if the BIA members or the PDBA members would like to come out of this agreement, then you need 50% or more to come together. So they would have to organize themselves to take the downtown out of this agreement. But I don't see the necessity. I recall when I was the council liaison for the PDBA, the tremendous amount of work that has to go on to get this agreement, and we all know that 5 years just zips along very, very quickly. So I don't see the need to have an expiry date, and I would like to ask us to look at removing that. And then my second question is in regards to the cost to the city for handling this council initiative. I'm wondering if we have a dollar figure to that.
All right, thank you for that. So, Mr. Manson?
If I may, Your Worship, with regards to the first one, I'm not sure that we can have a BIA bylaw without an expiration date. That's something that I would have to look into. I believe there has to be a date, contrary to what was said, but I could be wrong. As far as the staff cost would be concerned, it would be the cost of the postage to mail out the responses, as well as the staff time to compile the list for the mail out, and then to compile the responses afterwards.
All right, thank you for that. So let the record reflect that Mr. Manson did state that there are times when he can be wrong. All right, very good. So go ahead, Michelle, because I think you wanted to respond to that.
As far as the costs go, if we can be of assistance with the postage and the stuffing of envelopes and stuff like that, we're willing to do that. We wouldn't mind paying the postage. I don't know how much the postage is going to be. What it was the last time, that wasn't the big time. It was the chasing the people down, getting them to sign the forms that was very time consuming. That's it.
Further comments from members of council? Councillor Newfield.
Thanks very much, Your Worship, and thank you very much for the presentation. I happened to be reading the Times columnist yesterday, and the monitor section, and we'll have a copy distributed to each of the other councillors shortly. But there was a session on there on the living downtown and having a vibrant downtown, and it supports what you're saying. And the 22 new places, I think, are an exhibit that people want to be downtown. They appreciate being able to walk the places and do things downtown. So I think what you're doing as far as the business improvement area and as far as the PBDA is significant. It's really of importance. And I think that I see no reason for not expediting this situation and going forward with your request as far as a council initiative. I would hope that the rest of council sees it that way as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. So I guess what I'm curious about is what are the next steps? Because if we don't make a motion this evening, then how does it come back to council? And so I would like not to get lost because we've got 9 months, roughly, to get it through. So any recommendations or?
Well, you could bring a motion forward. But
I will bring it forward.
Bear with me for just a second, because I think we had one more individual around the table that had a question, and then perhaps, if you want, you can come forward with something. Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Worship. I did ask the question about the expiration date, and I am interested in having staff go through with that. But before I do request that, could I ask of the PDBA, is that something that would be useful?
I hadn't really thought about, going to that point. We were just looking at the next 5 to 10 years. It would be useful to not expire, but I don't think that, it's critical. And council initiative, then, if we go 5 or 10 years. We have to set our budgets within the bylaw, so it's kind of difficult to go too far without knowing what you want your budgets to be, because if you wanted to increase your budget on an annual basis and your bylaw doesn't expire, you have to do a new bylaw anyway. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that a non-expiring bylaw is what we want, or to change the boundaries if we decided we wanted to expand the boundaries. We just got a copy of Courtney's bylaw last week, and we were amazed that it didn't expire.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's probably too soon to have that discussion. Thank you.
I would think that if a motion were to be presented, as I suspect Councillor Powell will be doing here shortly, staff can certainly look at that as an aspect of the discussion as they come back to us with options. So, to that end.
Thank you, Worship. And so direct staff, just correct me if I'm incorrect with this, okay, Mr. Manson? Do you want to write it for me?
Go ahead, Mr. Manson. Why don't you give us a suggested wording?
That staff be directed to proceed with renewal of the PDBA bylaw for the period 2015 through 2019 by way of a council initiative.
So that's moved by Councillor Powell and seconded by, I believe, Councillor Powell-Davidson beat you gentlemen to that one. So discussion on the motion. All right, seeing none, all in favor, opposed, and that's carried unanimously. All right, so we are underway. Thank you, ladies. And I got to say, it's kind of interesting to me that even in a quiet economic time, it seems like all the activities in the downtown. It's very good. It's very positive. Thank you. All All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to our second delegation of the evening, and we have with us the famous former mayor, Ed Mayne, and it's regarding a fundraising performance to benefit the Parksville Community and Conference Center. So, Mr. Mayne, former Mayor Mayne, you know the routine, and the floor is yours, sir.
Worship, Council, it's been a while since I've had the pleasure of partaking in something in the chamber, and thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it. I'm here for a very specific reason tonight. What I'd like to do is invite council and staff and people watching at home to attend a dance that we're having on November the 30th. Councillor Lefebvre, November the 30th was the date that you asked about. This dance is being put on for the benefit of the Parksville Conference and Community Center so that they can purchase furniture for the center. And we have a group of 9 of us who get together on a very regular basis for fun. And 3 or 4 times a year we pick different charities around the community where we play at dances and then contribute the funds from those dances to those particular charities. And that's the purpose of this. So we're selling tickets at $15 a piece for November the 30th. It starts at 7:30 that evening. We will be playing, as you would probably suspect, old-time rock and roll with the emphasis on vocals, and it's very old-time rock and roll, a little bit of country, and even, believe it or not, a couple of new songs there. All our music's been picked out so that we will get your toes tapping and your feet dancing. The idea here is to have a good time. We always say when we go into these dances, the concept is to be like a old-time basement party. You know, if you recall, at least when I was younger, that's what we used to do, is congregate in people's basements with a band and play and have a good time, and that's really what we want to do. It's a very informal, lots of laughs, and of course, lots of dancing. So I'd like to extend that invitation to council and to everybody else. I would suggest the last time we played at the PCC for Tour de Rock, we sold 350 tickets. And there were a number of people who were disappointed due to the fact that they couldn't attend because we sold out very quickly, something in the order of about 2.5 or 3 weeks, all the tickets were sold. So we would like to suggest, we're only going to sell 300 tickets to this event. So we would like to suggest that if you're going to acquire tickets, to do that rather quickly, and you can do so through one of our members in the group, who most of the people know around town. The group's name, by the way, is Eddie and the Funk, just for everybody's information, or at the offices at the PCC, or you can also get tickets online if you go to Eddie and the Funk's Facebook page. There's tickets available there as well. And so that's what I have to say. I hope that everybody will be able to attend, and we look forward to having council there.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm going to allow for some questions, if that's okay,
Sure.
in case they want some clarification. And I'm going to suggest to council that perhaps, given that this is a fundraiser for our community and conference center, maybe we might want to consider purchasing a table, which would probably be 10 tickets, I would think.
It is 10 tickets. In fact, I'll give you a deal. If you take a table, I'll give them to you for the price of 9 tickets.
There you go.
Okay.
Since we're in effect paying ourselves, as you said, 100% of the proceeds are going back into the purchase of, I believe, are chairs. Mm-hmm. And I've had opportunity to sit on the new chairs, and it's night and day compared to what's there now, so which is fantastic. But I do see Councillor Greir's hand up, so with no further ado, go ahead, Councillor Greir.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, it's nice to see the mayor back in the council chambers again. I was at the last dance that you held at the PCC building, and it was a lot of fun, and it was a good time, and the music was great. There was one weak part of the orchestra that I thought was the bass player. And I'm hoping that maybe there'll be a new bass player for this one, or will it be the same bass player?
Maybe after tonight that may be the case.
Thanks very much for coming, and I'm sure we'll support it.
Thank you.
All right, so if you're so sure we're supportive, why don't you bring a motion forward? That's up to you, of course.
I will do that. That the city purchased 10 tickets, is it? Or
At the price of 9, apparently.
At the
and
price
that
of
would give us
9?
a table.
Price of a table is 9 tickets.
I would make that motion that the city supports this.
We have a seconder in Councillor Lefebvre, so on the motion itself, any discussion? All right, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. All right.
Thank you very much.
I too have attended one of your performances, and I thought it was quite brilliant, so I look forward to this.
Thanks. Look forward to seeing all of you.
Thank you. Take care. All right, moving right along, and we're making good time here, ladies and gentlemen. We have our third and final delegation this evening, and I'd like to welcome representatives from the Parksville-Qualicum Beach Tourism Association, and this is regarding the Municipal Regional District Tax Renewal. So, Blain, I believe it's the two of you. Very good. Come on forward. You know how this works, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. I'm going to be very brief in the presentation and open up the floor to any questions. Essentially, what we're looking for is a council resolution to support our 5-year application for the Municipal Regional District Tax, which used to be called the Additional Hotel Room Tax, just so we get our acronyms and our names correct here. The MRDT is a major part of the funding for Parksville-Qualicum Beach tourism. It goes along with the funding that we get from our stakeholders, as well as from additional business license surcharge that we enjoy getting from the town of Qualicum Beach, and also for some pass-through cooperative marketing opportunities that we do with our stakeholders. But by far, the MRDT is the major contributor to our core funding. So every 5 years, we need to go and, similar to how the BIA needs to get support, unfortunately, we don't have the same luxury to be able to do it on a counter petition, but we do need to get 51% of the hotel rooms in the region, as well as 51% of the properties in the area to support us. And as part of this process, we also need resolutions from all of our local governments to support our application. In the past, there was a different way that the funds through the tax arrived at Parksville-Qualicum Beach Tourism. In other jurisdictions, the funds are collected by the property, it's remitted to the province, and then the province provides it to the municipality, who then gives it to the organization that uses the funds. And in our case, we are what's called an eligible entity, and in 2009 we were appointed as one of those by the province. And what essentially that does is it allows the funds to come directly to us from the province. So there's no flow through the municipalities any longer. So essentially what we're looking for again is a resolution stating that council is in support of our renewal of the MRDT, and also an indication, because we have recently changed our name from the Oceanside Tourism Association to the Parksville-Qualicum Beach Tourism Association, that's included in the resolution, just to make sure the province is aware of us being one and the same organization. And I think that covers my presentation.
All right, thank you. So just for everyone's awareness, under correspondence, the next section, there is a recommendation that comes out of this request. But in the interim, while we have Mr. Sepos here, is there any questions for him from members of council? Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment, really. Thank you very much for all that you do. I think that you're a key organization. I know you're a key organization in our community and have been so for a long time. And I wanted to I've done it and write it, but I wanted to take this opportunity to public thank you and Robynne with regards to providing some accommodation for one of our guests who was working with the Oceanside Accessibility Committee. The Social Planning Association of BC was over here, and they were thrilled with the accommodation. They were thrilled with the hospitality, and I think that's another marketing effort that is going to come by. This gal went back, and she's still talking about stay in Parksville. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Further questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Powell Davidson.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thanks for coming tonight to speak to us. The additional hotel tax, or whatever it's called now, the Municipal Regional District tax, in my opinion, is a no-brainer. We really need to support the PQBTA and the work that they do. And by way of example, to follow up on what Councillor Lefebvre was saying, I attended the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance conference last week, which I will give my report on under new business, but there was a session there on tourism which saw the Canadian Tourism Association, the Vancouver Island Tourism Association, and our very own Blain Sepos from the PQBTA presenting on the Explorer quotient. And I was really tickled to see that our local tourism association is so progressive that they're one of very, very few associations and destination marketing organizations that have jumped on board with this, and we're already seeing the benefits of that program. So well done, and absolutely we should be supporting this.
All right, thank you. I don't see any further hands in the air, so thank you both very much. Thank you, Robynne, Blain, for taking the time to be here, and we're going to be moving almost immediately into correspondence here, so you should have your answer very quickly. I'm fairly confident you might get a receptive outcome. Thanks. All right, so we're now moving into correspondence. We have two items of correspondence this evening, and the first, of course, as you heard me just mention, is from the Parksville-Qualicum Beach Tourism Association, and it's the recommendation there on your page under 4A. Is there a mover or a seconder? So moved by Councillor Lefebvre, seconded by Councillor Neufeld. Is there any further discussion? So in effect, the recommendation really amounts to just simply a statement of support for this initiative. Seeing none, all in favor, opposed, and that's carried. Thank you. Now moving to our second item of correspondence, and this is from Charna Macfie. It's regarding determination of development cost charge rates, and the recommendation before you is to receive for information. Moved by Councillor Powell Davidson, seconded by Councillor Morrison. And now that it's on the floor, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, opposed, and that's carried. Thank you. Of course, the Report 5A has now been removed from the agenda, and that's from our Director of Finance. We will see that come back at our November 18th meeting. And so that allows us to move into Report 5B right away, which is from Mr. Metcalf, who is going to provide us with some details regarding the Silver Spur Riding Club annual equestrian toy ride.
Thank you, Your Worship. This report introduces for Council's consideration a special event application from Silver Spur Riding Club to hold an annual equestrian toy ride benefiting the District 69 Society of Organized Services on Sunday, November 24th. The ride will start at Ballina Secondary, travel on Morrison to McMillan, up to Hearst, and then stop at the SOS. It will then travel south on McMillan and Jensen to Craig. It will turn south on Craig and stop at the Stanford Place. There it'll pick up some seniors, go around the block, and then it'll travel back to Bolinas following the same route. This event has been run successfully in the past, and the recommendation is as per the report.
All right, thank you. Yes, this is not a new event, so we do have a recommendation before us which would allow this to proceed based on a series of conditions. So Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Greir. Any discussion? None, all in favor? Opposed, and that's carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on to Report C, and this is going to be from Mr. Manson, and it's regarding the proposed amendment of Regional Emergency Resource Agreement. So, Mr. Manson, go ahead.
If I may, Your Worship, in a nutshell, what this is under the provincial emergency preparedness directives, we're supposed to have an emergency preparedness plan. Part of our plan uses the resources of emergency social services and emergency communication team. As is outlined in the report, the volunteers that have been operating those best, both as the director and the deputy director, have indicated that they're stepping down from their positions at the end of December this year. We've been doing the best we can to try and recruit new volunteers to take over those positions, but we haven't, or we've basically been unsuccessful. What we're proposing actually is two options. One is to use the honorarium that we've been given both the Emergency Social Services Director and the Emergency Communications Director to combine that, those fundings into one, to hire a part-time coordinator to look after both organizations for 2014, and to look at it again in 2015 as to whether or not we continue with a part-time or whether it's required a full-time. The second option is to go full-time right away in 2014, which would require an additional $16,000. The recommendation from staff at this point is simply to use the honorarium that we already have to create a part-time position for 2014, which would give us a year to evaluate how it's working with a further recommendation to Council for 2015.
All right, thank you, Mr. Manson. So we do have that staff recommendation before us under 5C. Is there a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Powell Davidson, seconded by Councillor Lefebvre, and I'll open it to discussion. So I'm going to give mover the first opportunity. Go ahead.
I thought you were the
you're right, the seconder, but I don't see them.
second.
All right, very good. So Councillor Lefebvre.
I just wanted to make a comment. I really don't have a question. I agree with what's going on, and I think that this is the old adage: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In light of what's happened because of weather and all sorts of other things that have been going on, I think that the emergency management aspect of our community is very, very important. And at some other point in time, we're also going to have to look at, I know that the Insurance Bureau of Canada has become very, very concerned about costs. I saw a report in one of the local papers last weekend that if we were to get an earthquake on the in the amount in terms of the size of the earthquake that would strike Vancouver Island and surrounding area, the cost would be somewhere in the range of $75 billion. And the insurance industry are in no position to cover those kinds of costs at this present time. So I think all in all, I think that the anything to do with emergency programs, emergency resource management, and what have you, is becoming more and more important, as well as that aspect that someday we should be discussing with regards to insurance costs, because those costs are going to be going up. They're going to affect our budgets, and there'll be some long-term implications for that. So I'm fully supportive.
All right, thank you. I saw Councillor Greir with his hand up. Go ahead, Councillor Greir.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I disagree somewhat. I think we spend far too much money and too much time on emergency measures. We haven't had a disaster in Parksville since the dinosaurs were here. And we keep talking about when it's going to happen, and if it's going to happen, and it's going to happen. And we've got everybody paranoid that something drastic is going to happen here in Parksville. And my feeling is it might happen tomorrow, and it might happen maybe in 500 years from now. And I think it takes away from the fact that people are very responsible for their own safety, and in the case of an emergency, I think they look after themselves quite well, and I think they look after their neighbors quite well. And I think it takes a little bit away from the situation when everybody or some people like to have the government look after them all the time. People are very responsible, and they do react in a positive way if there is an emergency, and that's not to say that we're going to have one here in Parksville. Parksville is situated in such a place that maybe the worst earthquake off the coast might not affect us that much anyways. But I know everybody, the more you talk about something, the more everybody gets paranoid about it, and the more they want the governments to help them out. And I don't think this is the case with everybody. I think people are very responsible for looking after themselves, and I think it's a little bit of a misdemeanor when you say that the city government has to look after everybody in every situation. And I think we spend far too much time talking about this and far too much money, and I'm not in agreement with it.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Greir. Councillor Paul Davidson.
Oh, I can't sit quiet after that. There's absolutely no way. What do you mean we haven't had any disasters? Don't you remember the floods down Englishman River and the big fire in the downtown core? Emergencies are not just about earthquakes, Councillor Greir. There's all kinds of things that can happen with it in the case of an earthquake. But that being said, people will take care of themselves. You're absolutely correct about that. But we still need a central command area. And to my understanding, one of the big jobs that the emergency coordinators do take care of already, and Mr. Manson, correct me if I'm wrong, is, excuse me, they man the mobile communication, the mobile trailer. Is that correct? You know, the one that we have where there's the communication that allows us, if all the communication is wiped out as a result of a disaster or an emergency, these volunteers have been taking the training. We have the equipment for them to be able to communicate via, I believe it's email, and I'm not exactly sure how the equipment operates. But I think that we do need to have emergency, and I do believe we're mandated to have it. And this is money that we're spending that we're already spending, so I will be supporting this. I do have a question, though, Your Worship, and I'm not sure who to ask this through. We have a hiring freeze on, so I'm concerned about if we're creating a new position, even though we're not spending any more money than we currently are by combining these honorariums, and I'm very pleased that the staff are looking at it in that way. It's frugal thinking in my mind. But does this affect anything with the hiring freeze, or can we go ahead and pass this forward?
Well, I guess it's in how you would interpret that. In this case, you're taking two essentially volunteers that have honorariums attached and combining them into a part-time position. That would be an employee for sure, although as you pointed out, you're not adding any new funding into this. You're just simply reallocating funding that is in place already. So I think it all really boils down to how you interpret it, and I suppose you could interpret it as a new position. That is probably in part why staff are being very cautious moving forward to reevaluate 2014 and then pose the question in 2015, right? Did you want to add anything to that, Mr. Manson?
Other than to say that it was a council-imposed hiring freeze, so if council is authorizing this, they're fully within their rights to do so.
Oh, yeah, certainly that is true. Go ahead, Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I guess there were a couple of questions that I would have through you to Mr. Manson, and basically we're talking about two positions here, I understand, and have any exit interviews done as far as these individuals are concerned as to why they're leaving, the concerns that they might have with respect to responsibilities, and you know, have we done anything with respect to why some of the other volunteers aren't willing to step forward on a progression basis? Has there been no planning for this type of event, please?
Mr. Manson?
As is indicated in the report, Your Worship, we have talked to the people, and basically they're burnt out. They've, in the case of the person that's been doing it, they've been there for quite a while already. They've just had enough. It's time for somebody else to take over for them. We have known that this is in place. We have offered it to and actually tried to recruit from the other members that are volunteering in those organizations already. And again, they're unwilling to do it. It is a time commitment, as we know through, I think, a lot of volunteer organizations right now. It's harder and harder to get people to commit to these positions. And there is responsibility that goes along with it, and there is quite a time commitment. And on a volunteer basis, individuals just aren't willing to step forward.
Follow-up?
Yeah, go ahead, follow up.
When we're talking about these individuals and the emergency measures, I've spoken with the people who look after the command center, and they're ham operators, and they really seem to enjoy what they do, and I know a couple of people that were associated with them in Ontario. But we're not talking about those people. We're talking about whom are we speaking about now?
If I may, Your Worship, there's actually two components. One is the emergency social services part of it. This would be the person that coordinates how we look after displaced people, where you put them, whether it's in the PCCC, in a school, or even arranging to have them housed in motels, etc. That person is responsible for coordinating the whole event. For instance, if it was in the PCCC, they would have to arrange for whatever emergency bedding has been squirreled away somewhere to magically appear there, and have other volunteers go to the facility to help process people in and look after them while they're there. So that would be the director for the emergency social services. The other is the emergency communications team director, the person that I guess coordinates amongst all the ham operators that you're talking about to get them trained up onto the equipment that we have to do practices and that sort of thing. Not as onerous as the emergency social services, but it's still something that of the group that's there in the communications team, nobody wants to step forward and be the person to do the coordinating. There's lots of volunteers that want to participate. They just don't want to be the one that's responsible.
Another follow-up.
All right, another follow-up.
Please. As far as honorariums are concerned, what are we talking about? And this is going to be, if we go forward with a contract position, it will not be an employee. It will, in fact, be a contracted, so there'll be no EI, no CPP or anything of that nature. The person will be outside of the freeze, in other words. How will it be handled?
If I may, Your Worship, unfortunately, I don't know the honorarium. The two people that could have told me today when I looked at the report, when I found out that I was the one that was introducing it, were unavailable. So unfortunately, I couldn't get that number. As far as how we envision this going through, yes, it would be a contract position. So it wouldn't necessarily be an employee, at least for the 2014 part-time basis. After that, we would have to review it again, and I'm not going to say categorically now that starting in 2015 we would do it the same way again. I think we'd leave it open to options.
Thank you.
All right, so we've had a good go around. All right, Councillor Greir, I'm going to give you the second last word. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. This will be the first step in hiring a full-time employee, I'm sure, one way or another. We already have somebody on staff that works, I believe, 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'm not so sure what he does and how he coordinates anything. But this will be the first step in hiring somebody full-time. There's no question about that in my mind. Going back about 3 years, I think, the fire chief tried to organize various areas to do emergency measure work. And we had a gathering, I don't know, maybe 30 people. Everybody was rather enthusiastic. And we had plans, and we had directors, and we made up captains for each street. I was a captain on my street. I spent a great deal of time going door to door to see who lived in those houses and whether they had axes and whether they had hoses and so on and so forth. And the interest just died. And there's not the interest in continuing this thing simply because of our location and the fact that we haven't had any disasters. And we keep talking about the big one coming, but we might be talking about it 500 years from now too. And it could happen tomorrow. I'm not saying it does. But what if it happens on a Saturday night at 1 o'clock in the morning? Where are all these people going to be? If the earthquake come down in the middle of Parksville, the fire trucks wouldn't be able to move. Nobody could get to the city to look at anything. So it's not something that's automatic that it's going to work even if it does happen. So I think we should give a lot of consideration. I don't like the idea that we feel that the government has to look after everybody for every situation. I still believe that people can look after themselves, their neighbors, and when a disaster does happen, they do very well at doing that.
All right, Councillor Greir. So, all right, we do want to move it along, but go ahead, Councillor Neufeld. I promised him the second last word, so I guess I'm promising you the last word.
Hi. Councillor Greir has brought to mind a meeting that I attended, and Chief Banks was there as well. This was back in the spring, and it was down in the news where we looked at the effect of people with disabilities being able to be taken care of in the time of an emergency. And essentially what it came right down to was if you've got a requirement for an air compressor or an air tank, then you'd best look after it yourself. If you have the requirement for things such as wheelchairs and access, and you best make sure that you're on a level surface and not require an elevator. It was interesting. It was basically individual preparedness that was absolutely critical, and I think that this is one of the things that Councillor Greir is coming to. We all have to be individually prepared for the event that's going to occur. It may occur today, it may occur tomorrow, it may never occur. And it comes down to the case that it's the individual and the preparedness of that the individual to cope himself or to have others support him or her in the ability to cope. It's not to say that a fire can't strike and raise a block. It happens all the time. Elsewhere, it could happen here, but you know, we can cope with that type of situation. We do cope with it. We have a fire department to do that. It's the major things that we have to look at, and we just don't know what is going to happen, when it's going to happen, and I guess I'm somewhat akin to Councillor Greir. It may, in fact, move into or migrate into a full-time job in 18 months' time, and I'm somewhat leery about that. Thanks very much, Your Worship.
Thank you. Of course, it is entirely up to Council at that time when options are reviewed, so don't necessarily assume anything at this point. Councillor Powell is insisting she say something, so let's carry on.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess, from my perspective, this is not small time. This is communicating with the outside world when something happens. And this is, I know because I work for a government agency or government monopoly or whatever you want to call it, and we're one of the frontline people. If something goes down, a catastrophic event, we are contacted. We are the people that move forward. We need to be able to communicate with the outside world. This isn't about just looking after your neighbor, because all of that stuff is going to go on as well. And so I think maybe you're the dinosaur, because you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not like it was when you were born or when you grow up. It's a lot different now, and I think that for the cost of, what is that? How much is the cost? $20,000? $20,000 for a year. Like, give your head a shake. That's pretty cheap for safety as far as I'm concerned. So I can't even believe we had this conversation as long as we did.
I was trying. All right, very good. So I think we've gone around this issue quite well. The only thing I will add to that is I do not want to be the mayor that has to stand up there and explain why we couldn't have an emergency coordination center or an emergency shelter in place, because we simply didn't think that it would ever happen here. So I'm hoping that you will all support this resolution, and to that end, all those in favor? All right, well, I'll be in the in favor category. All those opposed? All right, so that carries. Thank you very much, and we will reevaluate this at the end of next year. All right, we're making good time. That was a good discussion. On the heels of that discussion, though, there were some very valid points, and it concerns me, and that's why I sometimes say, sometimes I kind of wish we'd have a little bit of a rumble, not too much, to remind people that it is very much up to the individual to prepare for things. And I know of several streets where they have a street captain, and they've determined the assets that are available to them, and they've taken a very appropriate approach, which is that, the government isn't going to be able to save us should something really significant happen, and we have to take care of ourselves. And we do state quite often that, it depends, of course, on the scale of the event, but that it may be days, weeks before we're able to access all areas of the community and provide assistance. So anyway, to that end, maybe that's a good thing to be discussing, is personal awareness and preparedness. All right, moving on to bylaws. We have one bylaw this evening for third reading and a recommendation that Zoning and Development Amendment Bylaw 2013 number 2000.90 be read a third time. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Councillor Morrison, seconded by Councillor Powell. Any discussion? Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's been discussion regarding this particular project with regards to the 2 stories, and the planning department brought, at least to my attention, that in one particular municipality on Vancouver Island, they have 2 types of bylaws that relate to this type of operation. And in one of the bylaws, it gives discretion in terms of height and the ability, in other words, if height is a problem or is perceived as a problem by the neighbors, that the height issue can be dealt with. Now, I guess this is not, we're well into the piece now to be discussing this, but I thought that I'd throw that out there because that certainly is an issue for this particular project. And I don't know, I guess my question would be to staff, has the boat left the dock? Or is there something that, at this point in time, that something could be done about it? With regard specifically to the height.
All right, I'll ask our Director of Community Planning.
If I may, Your Worship, basically at this point, at this juncture, Council has a few fairly limited options. Council may adopt a bylaw or defeat a bylaw. Council may alter and then adopt a bylaw provided the alteration does not alter the land use, does not increase the density, or does not, without the owner's consent, decrease density. So it is technically possible for Council to amend a bylaw, but it's also technically possible for an applicant not to proceed with a bylaw.
Follow up, Your Worship.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor.
So I gather if you couldn't go up, you'd be increasing the density, logically.
Likely, yeah. I mean, changing the height could impact the density potentially, depending on to the extremity of the height change.
All right. Any further discussion? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like some clarification through you to Councillor Lefebvre about the 2 types of bylaws. Is he talking about the 2 stories in this development? Could we get some clarity around that?
Councillor Lefebvre, did you want to clarify for Councillor Powell?
Yes, I believe that there are some of the homes are going to be 2 stories, and I believe that some of the residents and the nearby residents were concerned, and there was that aspect of the frosted windows to deal with the privacy issue, and that was going to be part of the covenant to build. Am I correct in that?
If I may, Worship, through to Councillor Lefebvre and Councillor Supal, there is a restrictive covenant that is a requirement of this rezoning that does limit any second-story windows that face exterior to the overall development to be frosted. That covenant was a requirement that was presented at public hearing. Therefore, any amendment to that covenant actually goes through the same process as the rezoning. It would actually require another public hearing to remove that type of covenant should the application be accepted.
So let me ask a question then. Assuming that this weren't even in place and we're going with the already established zoning, can you not build a 2-story house on that?
If I may, Worship, yes, you can. Under the current RS1 zoning, a 7.5 meter dwelling could be constructed, which would typically facilitate a 2-story dwelling.
So what are we really protecting here, really, at the end of the day?
Well, I think that what I'd like to do in future projects of this type is to have a look at that bylaw. I believe it's the municipality of Victoria that has it, which deals with the issue of height. And when height does become a problem, there's an alternative to that, and that height is not permitted. Certain heights, beyond a certain height, they're not permitted.
Okay, so, I mean, that's something we can certainly do at a later time and take that under review for future consideration. Any further discussion? Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. And in fact, I think I was probably the one that initiated this as far as the discussion was concerned, and I spoke with one of your planners, Mr. Russell, and the material that she was able to provide showed us that, in fact, Victoria does have two RS 1 and 2, and there's a 7.5 and a 5.5 meter height restriction that takes this into account as far as the neighbors and what is available. I'm not saying that we want to do it here. This would start the whole process over again, and most of council is willing to go along with what we have here. I think I'm still unclear even at this point whether I want to go for it, but I want to have some clarification as far as the covenant is concerned. If a person decided at the end of the day, 2 or 3 days down, or 2 or 3 years down the road, that they wanted more light or whatever into their house, how can we provide assurance that those windows will not be taken out and replaced?
If I may, Your Worship, I don't think anyone can provide assurance that windows won't be replaced any more than I can provide assurance that someone won't build a building too close to their property line. What a covenant does, it provides an avenue for council to take legal action should someone violate the covenant. In the same way that if someone violates a setback provision of the zoning bylaw, council can also direct action be taken.
All right. Shall we proceed to the vote then? Very good. I will call it. Third reading. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. All right, we're moving on, ladies and gentlemen, to the new business section. Now, before we get into the discussions, I'm just looking to my colleagues around the council table. How many of you have items you wish to bring forward under new business? So, everyone except for the two. Okay, very good. And you wanted to speak first, Councillor Greir, and this is in relation to the advisory committee, perhaps?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I'll give you the first go here, and then we'll carry on from there.
Yes, well, I don't have a complete report from the advisory committee, simply because they felt, and a couple of them are out of town as well, but they felt that they weren't giving enough clear advisory on what is expected of them when it comes to casino and medical marijuana. So anyways, I appointed one lady to look at the marijuana situation and another one to look after the casino, and 2 others to come up with some ideas of revenue other than those 2 projects. So, and we did discuss other revenues, and I think you'll find our next meeting's on the 26th, and you'll find that they'll come up with maybe 6, 8 new revenue streams. However, they were prepared to go ahead, but after our meeting, I think the mayor here asked me if I could have a report on both of those by the 4th, and I said no, we couldn't because we didn't have enough time. And then it was felt that you were moving ahead quickly with the marijuana development things, thinking that other communities were going to get involved with it and so on. So anyways, because it's both federal situation and provincial, we thought that they have all the rules, regulations, and everything in place, and there isn't much that we could come to advise council on rather than whether the city of Parksville is ready for either one of those. So I really don't have a report from them, and there could be more of a report on the 26th. However, I do have a motion to put forward as myself as councillor, and I will read that out to you. Whereas the City of Parksville is seeking additional revenue sources unrelated to property taxes or user fees, and whereas recent changes to the federal law regarding production and distribution of medical marijuana appears to provide an opportunity for either direct or indirect benefit to the city through established of a medical marijuana facility within the Parksville municipal boundaries. And whereas the residents of Parksville may have moral or ethical belief related to either of, or both of these topics, now therefore be it resolved that before any further council debate or action is taken on these matters, an appropriate survey of Parksville residents be conducted to determine the level of community support for these topics. So that's my motion. It's my feeling that maybe you want to have a seconder.
Yeah, let me get a seconder first. And okay, well, I saw Councillor Neufeld second that, and now as the mover, you can speak to it again, Councillor Greir.
Well, there's a couple of things. I think because there's going to be a tremendous amount of restrictions and maybe money involved, and I think at the end of the day, I don't think we're going to have a casino. I think we're too close to Nanaimo. We're too close to Port Alberni, and I don't know how many casinos we have already on the island. And I know from doing my own little survey that there's a lot of people that are in favor of it. However, I've also heard from a lot of people now that certainly aren't in favor of it. As for the marijuana, the medical marijuana, my feeling is, again, and it's a personal feeling, is that down the road, I think it'll be decriminalized, and therefore everybody will be growing it, and then maybe we might be stuck with a production farm that's not worthy. Also, I heard quite a debate on television the other night about it, and they talked and discussed it with professional underground growers. And this chap had a mask on, and you could see he had a tremendous amount of plants in his operation. And he's really excited about this going through because of the price that municipalities would be charging for it. And he says it's going to do nothing but make his business better, and there's going to be far more underground grow operations than there are now. And really, the government licensed places will just be overpriced and they'll be outplayed. So it's not going to do away with private grow operations. In fact, it might even make it increased. And as I say, maybe at the end of the day, if another government gets in power, they could legalize it and decriminalize it, and then everybody will be growing it. So those are just my observations, but I would like to make that motion, and the city maybe could conduct that survey, and if we have a great number of people that are in favor of these, then I would support it. But if we don't, then I think it's a good way to get the word out there one way or another and let people have their say. But these are two serious developments, and I think that the people should be involved in it. Thank you.
All right, so we have that motion on the floor, moved and seconded. I'd like to address it if council permits me so, or if you wanted to speak to it first, Councillor Powell. You did have your hand up. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. First of all, when you talk about a survey, is it a survey of all the citizens of Parksville, or is it a survey of 300 people? Think that far ahead?
Yeah, there's two ways you can do it. We could run it through our website, which wouldn't cost us very much and wouldn't take an awful lot of time, I don't suppose. Or I was talking to our CAO today, and he said you could run it through, I think it's IPSO in Reed, which would be far more expensive. So this would be up to council, if they decided to do a survey at all, then it would be up to council. I'm not a big person in paying a lot of money for surveys, but I think this is an important one. There's no sense of us going down this road and spending time and money on it if, in fact, the people don't want it. And maybe it's not a good fit for Parksville. I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but I think we should test the market out.
All right, let me just address that real quick, and then I'll pass it on, because I've done a lot of research in a couple of these areas. With respect to the issue around the casino, that is let's make the assumption that there really is a strong support base here to move forward, and I think that's an assumption we can't even make right now. We're not talking about a short-term play here. We're talking about a very long-term play, because to your point, Councillor Greir, there are actually communities that have been seeking gaming centers and or casinos for quite some time unsuccessfully. In terms of a survey for that, we are in no rush whatsoever to have to do anything, and certainly the members of the advisory committee are under no pressure to bring something back to this meeting on the casino question, because, again, it's such a big concept. There's so many elements to it, and we saw at our meeting not too long ago that, you know, there's definitely, I think, a group that's quite concerned. Absolutely, I would agree with you. And then there's also very much a support base, and those concerns that we're hearing can be related to all kinds of things, not necessarily the fact that there's a casino or a catalyst for a bigger amenity, but it could be related to where it would go, how it would function, what kind of manner it's in. I think the ultimate survey for that would perhaps be a plebiscite at the next election, and I really think this is a much longer-term sort of concept, and if indeed council feels by this time next year, let's say, or slightly earlier than this time, that there is a warrant for it, that might be a very inexpensive way to get to the entire city to put weigh in. Well, let me finish, Councillor Greir, and then I'll... So go ahead on the plebiscite.
Just one comment that was made from our advisory committee that might have been a good way to go.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very inexpensive way to do a very thorough survey, but I'm always leery about moving forward with surveys or questions if we don't really have anything other than a concept to put forward, right? So we saw that in our open house. You know, when I started asking the folks that were opposed what the rationale was, there were some that said we would never want something like this on our waterfront, right? But maybe if it's over in the resort area, it wouldn't be a big deal. You have to be sort of at least at a point where you have some detail, something of substance that you can then ask the community whether they have supported or not. And that's not to suggest that we should be spending tremendous amounts of time working on it if we don't feel there isn't any support there, but that's part of why we have something like an advisory committee that could come back and talk to us about various aspects. So one of the things I would hope, for instance, in time, the advisory committee could come back and, for instance, provide to us by way of information is maybe talking with the staff sergeants of various communities that have these facilities to ask them what kind of impacts they've actually seen real time. Maybe the types of facilities themselves, you know, are there, you know, certain amenities that work very well, that kind of thing, and then their own perhaps opinions, you know, or what they're hearing from the community. And then at that point you have a little bit more information, and that's how you continue to move through. And at some point council may say, you know what, it's not even worth going to a plebiscite, right? In terms of the medicinal marijuana, there are a few things that we need to understand here. One is that it's a federally mandated industry. It's 100% legal. I don't see the controversy, quite frankly. It's immaterial to me whether it's marijuana or not. This is for medicinal purposes to be provided to people under a doctor's care and for no one else. It has nothing to do with recreational marijuana. You're absolutely right. There's a $7 billion estimated dollar industry in BC in the recreational side predominantly, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon. But in terms of medicinal marijuana, this is very much here, and it is developing rapidly. As a city, we cannot regulate or prohibit this type of activity, so it would be inappropriate for us to ask the community whether they want it or not. We have to allow it. We can only regulate it to the point of trying to place it in areas where we feel it would be most appropriate. But again, not to the point of prohibition. That's the law. And just so you might be interested to know, for instance, in Nanaimo, they're just at second reading right now. An American firm is in the process of wanting to establish a 60,000 square foot medical production facility in their industrial park. It's gone through 2 readings so far in council. I was having an interesting discussion with the mayor there today. And, you know, it may very well come into being. And that will be about 20 jobs, and very much in keeping with federal legislation. It has to meet a whole series of criteria. Now, again, you know, it's very, I would urge that you not support this particular motion only because I think you might be sending the wrong message to our residents as well, that they actually have a say in it. The ALC has indicated that this is appropriate for agricultural land use, so we can't, again, prohibit it. If somebody were to come and want to establish a facility in our ALR, we would have to allow them as long as they meet the normal conditions that you would expect for any kind of a development. So very, very important to make that understanding known, especially if you're asking people not to have something. It's an industry. It's an industry that's just at the beginning, and there is opportunity here. I would suggest that council could actually be very creative. We could, for instance, look at creating a public-private partnership with a firm and actually share in the revenue if that were something that we would choose to do so. I think there is some real potential there. It would be something that's obviously at the very beginning of what is expected to be, just on the medicinal side, $1 billion a year industry, and it would be a shift from what we do best, which is take money from people and actually look at trying to generate some money. The way we could do that is by providing land, because that provides an advantage for any company, and in exchange for that advantage, they would sign an agreement with us of some nature, which is your typical public-private partnership. They would assume most of the risk, as is typical in the 3P, but that wouldn't suggest that there is no risk to us, and ultimately that could be an avenue that we may want to pursue or not. But I think that we need a little bit more time to analyze this and determine what would be the way forward. And I know that Councillor Lefebvre is wanting to bring forward a motion which I think is very important for us to consider, which is just even at the state of where we would like to have these facilities, or perhaps where we would not like to have these facilities, having the right kind of zoning in place. And one of the interesting, and then I'll give it up here, one of the interesting concerns right now amongst municipality, and there are many that are moving to take advantage of this, because like us, they have long-standing desires to bring industry into their communities, especially light industry. There's a concern about how the assessment authority will tax these facilities. So if they're taxed as agricultural use, then the tax revenues would be very, very low. And so there's that out there as well, and that's why I think if you were a little creative and we were to consider looking at it by way of a share in revenues, we might get around that issue. And I'll leave it there for the moment. I'll allow you to readdress, but then I do have others here that wish to speak to this.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's certainly lots of pluses from the government's point of view. They're trying to overcome the black market, as I mentioned earlier. But it comes down to dollars and cents. Are these people going to buy from a municipal operation or a private operation when it's $10 or $15 or $20 a gram? And I don't know how they sell it, but we'll say it's $10 or $15 a gram. The chap on the television, he's going to sell it for $5. So where is the big market going to be? It always comes down to money and the market share. And I believe the government's getting themselves into something that's not going to be workable. As a businessman myself, I look at the dollars and cents. If I needed medical marijuana, am I going to pay $15 or $20 a gram when I can buy it from Joe Blow over here for $5? Or grow my own. As they had several people on this program, and they are going to continue to grow their own simply because they can't afford the government price. So it comes down to money and pricing, and you know as well as I know, anything the government gets into, they can't run it. So I'm very skeptical that it'll work. I think the idea is good, and I think, as you say, there's all kinds of potential. I'm not so sure whether there is when it comes down to selling it, who's going to buy it, and who's going to pay the price.
I understand that. Councillor Lefebvre.
Thank you, Worship. Well, Councillor Greir doesn't read my emails, because I attended a meeting at the RDN a few weeks ago. I sent an email to Council and I copied the CAO. The discussion that's going on right now within the RDN is how to zone, or what type of lands that they're going to zone for the growing of medical marijuana. As the Mayor has mentioned, this is not a case of asking for permission. Right now, anybody that's got ALR land or farmland designation can grow medical marijuana. So we have to decide as a community, which is why I was going to bring up the motion this evening. The RDN now have some firms that expressed interest in growing medical marijuana in certain areas. I don't know exactly where those areas are. That's not important. But they are asking, staff are moving ahead on behalf of the electoral areas to do that. So it's not a question of asking the people of Parksville whether they want to grow medical marijuana or not. They don't have a choice. The National Farm Building Code would be enacted to put up a building on ALR land. So anybody in Parksville tonight who wants to grow medical marijuana makes an application to the federal government, deals with the National Farm Building Code, and goes ahead and builds a building. My motion this evening was going to be a counter to, with all due respect to Councillor Greir's motion, that we get staff working on this, because this is something that could happen in our own backyard without us having any setting out any zoning requirements or any potential zoning requirements, or as the Mayor says, looking at the possibility of a public-private partnership. in terms of funding. There are two different types of grow operations that you can have. One is whereby you grow the marijuana and you package it on site, and the other one is where you grow the marijuana and you have the packaging done elsewhere. That is now allowed under federal government legislation. We can't, whether you ask everybody in Parksville whether they want it or not is immaterial, irrelevant, and useless, because they can go ahead and do it anyway. So I won't be supporting your motion on that basis, because you're asking people something over which they have absolutely, positively no control and no say in the matter. So I think that I'd rather focus on asking staff to prepare a report on the growing of medical marijuana within Parksville's municipal boundaries, and some suggestions that they might make in terms of where we would want that, or where we would prohibit that type of operation, because it's going to happen if we don't do anything about it. ALR land is a prime target, and we more than likely we can't ban anybody from wanting to grow that on ALR land. That's a no-brainer. That's the top of the list, and we know that we've got ALR land within the city boundaries of Parksville. So tomorrow morning, somebody could, with the permission of the Federal Department of Agriculture, grow medical marijuana. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I think that I would much prefer, I won't be supporting Councillor Greir's motion for the reasons I've just mentioned, but I would much prefer to get staff working on this as the RDN staff are doing, and probably working with RDN staff, because their issues are pretty much the same. And they're asking also, are there other areas, for example, would we allow it in the industrial park? So I think that I would rather see staff prepare a report on the growing of medical marijuana within Parksville's municipal boundaries and what some of our options are.
All right, so Councillor Powell, we have to give everyone a turn here. Go ahead, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. And so I just would like to clarify, first of all, it sounds like we're having two separate conversations. One is the resolution that Councillor Greir put forward was to do a survey. And two is federal legislation, which is true we don't have any control over. And I agree with the Mayor that we don't have any control over federal legislation, and it wouldn't be appropriate to do a survey. However, when you start talking about the city giving land into P3, then that does involve the citizens of Parksville, and I think they should be allowed to have some sort of say in where we want to go. I agree with Councillor Lefebvre, let's be proactive with the zoning, but what we're talking about, or what it sounds like you're talking about as the Mayor, is somebody to promote that business and go in a partnership, and that is quite different than just the legislation that we have no control over. So could we get clarification about, one, what we're talking about, and if we're talking about both, then can we divide it up so we're dealing with one thing at a time?
Well, you're absolutely right, Councillor Powell. We're talking about the resolution on the floor right now, which essentially would say that we would survey the residents in one form or fashion about whether or not they want to see, if I understand correctly, a casino and or medicinal marijuana in the city. So, and it's around that we've been discussing it. I will happily clarify to you what I was discussing, perhaps once this resolution is either passed or failed. If it's passed, well, then it may not be a moot point. But nonetheless, and then you're absolutely right, though. What I'm talking about is not something that we would do without consultation. So, other comments regarding the motion that's on the floor right now? Go ahead, Councillor Greir. I'll give you one.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I agree with Councillor Lefebvre. We have we can't stop such a grow operation in the city if some private company wanted to come in. However, I would certainly feel, like Councillor Powell said, that if we're talking about a partnership here, and if the community is going to put in taxpayers' dollars into it, then we better have a survey to see whether they're interested in that. So I could change my motion to state that. What's that? I could change my motion to state that we could have a survey done on the casino, and then as far as the marijuana grow-up is concerned, we could have a survey to see whether, in fact, the residents would like the city to get involved in such a business. And I come back to the fact that my personal feeling is it's not going to be successful. So I would, and I'm not against the grow-up, and I'm not against the casino as such. I think both could have some revenue for the city. But I do think that the grow up in the time coming at us from other governments, if they change the government, we're going to be left. If we're involved, we're going to be left holding the bag because we're not going to be able to compete against those in the black market. So I would change my motion to read, as far as the marijuana is concerned, that a survey should be the fact if the residents want to get involved personally with it or in partnership with anybody.
Well, okay. I'm just throwing an idea out there, though. We're nowhere near that point at all.
I know you're not.
So, I mean, if we ever got to that stage, you would have to, by way of council, would have to either make some decisions or could conduct surveys and or do whatever you like.
There'd have to be a plebiscite.
It may not even be something that we can do at this stage. So I think that's a little premature. I mean, I think...
well, it wouldn't be a bad idea to have a survey to get the people's feelings.
I don't disagree. But again, if you're going to go out and survey folks, you have to give them some detail, right? And there's no point in serving them about something that maybe isn't even real. You know what I mean? I just think it's premature is all I'm suggesting to you. But I absolutely agree with the principle that, those are big steps, and they would involve quite a bit of public input, I'm sure. And we would take our marching orders from the community, I'm sure. So any further discussion on the motion? I don't see modifying your motion wouldn't be a friendly amendment. It would change the flavor of it significantly. If you want to put forward an amendment to the motion to deal with public-private partnerships with marijuana. Okay, so you're asking for an amendment that a survey be conducted to see if the community wants to move forward with a casino concept, and that prior to any sort of public-private partnership, there would have to be a survey conducted to determine the support for that. Okay, so that needs a seconder. You're moving the amendment. Are you seconding?
I would.
You can't speak to it unless you second it.
I'll second it.
Okay, so you've seconded it, Councillor Neufeld. Now you can speak to it.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a number of friends and associates that have multiple sclerosis, so that they already use cannabis, and so when I hear this, I think that there is a market for medical marijuana, but in fact most of them buy it off the street and get a far better product than they get from the government, and they buy it far cheaper, so that when we start getting into costing and distribution, I really think about. I mean, these people who are doing it now are when I say who are growing it to grow up, it's costing them the possibility of a felony conviction, or at least a conviction as far as our court system is concerned, and that prescribes travel and things of that nature. And yet they're willing to do it because, in fact, they're making a great deal of money at it, even at a relatively low cost. So I'm not sure whether or not we would be able to get into the business and provide a product at a degree of potency that is desired. And so I look at a number of sides of it, and I just think that medical marijuana is not something that we want to get into as a corporate entity. That's my opinion. As far as casinos are concerned, I think there are issues with respect to health issues, safety and security issues. There are too many other social issues surrounding casinos that just cause me great concern. And given the fact that there are casinos all around us that are already taking off a certain amount of money out of Parksville, I would prefer to see that occur than a tremendous amount of money being taken out of Parksville and going into the provincial coffers, and not being at least some of it being retained here in the city. There are a number of issues there that I would want to have
Councillor Neufeld, and notwithstanding your points, we're only talking to the amendment portion of this motion, so.
Fine, but as far as the amendment's concerned, we'll hold it to that. But I think that the surveying is absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Councillor Paul Davidson, on the amendment only.
For goodness sakes, can we please go forward? There's no need to do a survey at this time. We haven't got any information to survey people. The appropriate time is after we have some information, after people have had a chance to do their own research, and then you've got something to vote on. I mean, we're not going to sit here and debate the pros and cons of a casino and medical marijuana based upon a television show that somebody saw. Let's just vote this down and get on with the meeting.
All right, thank you. So on the amendment only, any further comments? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I won't support the amendment. I think it's...
All right, so we around the table enough on the amendment only? Okay, so I'm just calling it on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? All right, so the amendment failed. We're going back to the original motion, which is essentially a survey for both those two issues. On the original motion, any further discussion? All right, I'll call it. All in favor? Opposed? All right, and that motion is defeated. Okay, moving on. That concludes your official new business time frame there, Councillor Greir, and we'll move on to the next item. And who would like to go next? I do have 3 items, but I'll save them until the end. All right, so go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre, and then we'll carry on.
Do you want? I have a motion that I'd like to put forward, Your Worship, if I may, based on my earlier comments and my involvement with the RDN staff and the electoral areas. My motion is that staff prepare a report on the growing of medical marijuana within Parksville's municipal boundaries, and that would include what some of the, based on what the national federal Department of Agriculture will allow in terms of ALR lands, and whether there'd be a recommendation. For example, we have ALR lands, we also have industrial lands, so do we want to consider that? And the staff would staff make that kind of a recommendation? So it's very general that staff prepare a report on the growing of medical marijuana within Parksville's municipal boundaries.
Okay, Mr. Manson, is that a motion that will give you the sufficient direction you need? Because I see you've got your light on already.
Could I suggest a better wording or a different wording?
Certainly.
Councillor Lefebvre, is that okay with
That's
you?
That's fine with me.
Okay, go ahead and make your suggestions, sir.
That staff be directed to review City of Parksville zoning bylaw 2000 and RDN bylaw 500, and to provide options and a recommendation to provide for the establishment of medical marijuana facilities within existing agricultural or industrial zones.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you.
I think that's true to the intent of his original thought anyway, so that will be your motion. Need a seconder on that motion, seconded by Councillor Morrison. Now discussion on that motion. Okay, so could you read the motion again, Mr. Manson, for Councillor Powell?
That staff be directed to review City of Parksville zoning bylaw 2000 and Regional District of Nanaimo zoning bylaw 500, and provide options and a recommendation to provide for the establishment of medical marijuana facilities within existing agricultural and or industrial zones.
All right, that is what is on the floor. So, discussion on that motion. So I don't see any hands. I do want to address it because we were getting into it in the last series, but just again to reiterate a couple of things that I heard you say, Councillor Greir, which I think is important to understand. First and foremost, again, this is obviously a Health Canada mandate, federally sanctioned, totally legal, medicinal purpose regulations. You're kind of delving into the recreational marijuana aspects, which this isn't. You're absolutely right. There is, and I actually saw the report that you're referencing, there is concern because there isn't a clear understanding yet as to how much supply will be made available for the demand. We know demand is growing rapidly. In 2012, it tripled. Interestingly enough, half of that was in British Columbia alone. So they're already estimating about $1 billion a year market building out over a period of time. But until you have the supply side established, you don't know what the cost per gram will be, or in terms of the sale of it. So yes, if you're not able to provide it at a lesser rate than what one might have to purchase in the back alleys and shady areas of our communities, you may very well continue to spur on an underground market. And there's some real concern right now about the patients, because there isn't, it appears, enough time to get a supply side established to provide for the demand. And so these folks, many of whom are growing their own, and you may have folks with MS and other conditions doing that, are suddenly looking at having to purchase it, and they may not be able to afford to do so. So there is some concern there, but that is actually something that's way beyond our ability to discuss and or really fix, because it's at the federal level. And there have been problems in the past in terms of the quality and the availability and the price. Bottom line is that it is a new industry. It's coming. There are a number of communities that are positioning themselves to be beneficiaries of that industry. There are others that perhaps want it to go away, and it is, I presume, controversial for some, although, as I said earlier, I don't see why. If it was Bayer wanting to open up an aspirin factory in our community, would we be that concerned about it? Same thing. It's medicinal purposes, right? So it's an interesting discussion, and I would support this motion because at least it allows us to provide some information back. We're also going to receive some information from your advisory committee on it, and then we're in a much better position to be able to have an intelligent discussion around this. And that is what I will say for the moment. Go ahead, Councillor Lefebvre.
In preliminary discussions with the RDN staff and the electoral area directors, it would appear, and I don't know any more than what was said, but it would appear that if somebody builds a facility that not only produces but packages the marijuana for medicinal purposes, then the revenue is greater to the municipality from a commercial taxation point of view. And nobody has any figures on that yet, but that would be, of the two operations, just the growing of the marijuana and then shipping it out for packaging is less commercial revenue viable than growing and packaging on site. And that's what there'll have to be more information on that.
Yeah, and we can clarify that. My understanding within the Act is it has to be packaged and sold from the site itself, and no face-to-face sales, right? It has to be done by courier. There's also a research and development component to all of this, which we should be aware of as well. It's not just about producing. It's also about developing new areas within this environment as far as how the plant is used. And it's important to understand that in many treatments there is no requirement for a high, and people don't want a high associated with it. So there's a whole R&D component that I think is worthy of exploration. And again, you might want to try and attract companies of that nature to come into your community and do the R&D work. It's entirely up to us as a council, but we can't really make any decisions until we have a little bit more information. So, further discussion? All right, all in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. All right, let's move on to some more difficult questions. So, you've complete, Councillor Lefebvre, as far as...
Just one quick report, Your Worship.
Okay, very quickly, please.
I attended the special general meeting of the Oceanside Community Arts Council on October the 28th. It's been widely reported on in the newspapers. I'll just give Council a very brief update. I thought that the retiring board, or the board that has resigned, did a remarkable job in terms of renovating the existing building, but it made it quite clear at that meeting that the members of the Oceanside Community Arts Council have some big decisions to make. And by keeping the building in itself is a money pit. And by keeping the building, there's certainly going to have to be ways and means to fund not only the operation of the building, but the maintenance, repair, and future capital investments. They're talking about brand new windows. There's a significant amount of windows in that building, which is going to cost a small fortune. And the role of the Oceanside Community Arts Council, which is to promote the arts throughout the Oceanside community. And that was the issue that the outgoing board posed to the members at that meeting. And there'll be, I gather that Councillor Neufeld attended a meeting today, this afternoon, which I was not able to attend. I was at an RDN meeting that I had to attend as a voting member. But there'll be another meeting to elect a new board, I believe, and look for more volunteers in a couple of weeks' time, 2 weeks' time. So simply in a nutshell, that's where things stand. And it'll be up to the new board to decide where they want to go and what direction they want to take in terms of retaining the building and also dealing with the Arts Council role mandate, or getting rid of the building and focusing on the Arts Council mandate. So some important decisions to make, and some important decisions to make with some serious financial implications to those decisions for the members of the arts community.
All right, thank you. Shall we move to Councillor Powell Davidson? Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I don't have a cold. I've got something in my eye which is causing me to sniffle, and it's very uncomfortable.
I thought Councillor Greir might have brought you to tears.
Yes, he did. He always does. Okay, two things. Your Worship, last week I attended the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance Summit, as I do every year, and I was, as every year, come away with tons and tons of great ideas and wonderful information. However, for the sake of this evening, I prepared a very, very brief report. I attended 4 sessions. One was on tourism, and I spoke briefly about that earlier this evening. We learned about an ambassador program that is being offered in Tofino, so I've already connected up with the Tofino mayor to learn a little bit more about that program. It's a free program for their community, and it's widely participated in, and the idea behind it is awesome service from every angle of the community. Everybody is a partner in tourism, as we know, and so I'm looking forward to getting some more information on that. The other session that I took part in was entitled Entrepreneurs, It's Worth the Risk, and in keeping with the new agreement we've just come up with the Chamber in regards to attracting young entrepreneurs or old entrepreneurs, any kinds of entrepreneur will be fine. We learned about doing business on Vancouver Island and some ways to how to attract entrepreneurs. So what I'm doing about that information is I will be passing on my notes to the staff, and I was really pleased to see that a lot of what was recommended in terms of what we can do at the City Hall level is already so greatly in place with what we're doing. But there were a few new ideas that they might not have considered or that might be useful. The third session was on film, and what I was really excited about, we had presentations from the North Island Film Commissioner as well as the South Island, as well as some film professionals, one of whom lives in our area. The big message that they brought to us was that the film industry on Vancouver Island is about to boom again. It was basically killed back in 2008 when the government of BC, and I don't exactly understand the terminology, but it was some kind of taxation which really killed Victoria film industry, and of course that spilled off up into our area. So what was at the time a $20 million economic booming industry has now been functioning at around the 7 mil. But the Victoria Film Commission has been really working with the province, and they're expecting within 2 years to have that whole taxation thing sorted out, and they're so confident that the film industry is about to boom on the South Island, again will spill over to the rest of us, that they're already hunting around for studio and office space, so we're really excited about that. One big growth area in the film industry on Vancouver Island is in the animation and also in the the gaming, and we're really attracting a lot of these film professionals to our area. So I was quite excited about that. So one of the things I am doing is connecting with the local film and animation and digital people in our area, and continuing to work with Deb Tarduff on ensuring that Parksville is ready for when that boom happens. The fourth session I took part in was food security and the new Vancouver Island economy. What we learned there, many things of course, one of which was I learned about VICRA, which is Vancouver Island Community Research Alliance, which includes the big learning institutions that are all over Vancouver Island. They're all working together and also on their individual parts, which they collaborate on. I learned about the Capital Reach in food, and agriculture initiative roundtables, which I have asked if I can be involved in. I've learned about the Island Food Health, which is a new extensive Vancouver Island program that is being worked on and will eventually involve all of us. So I've connected with the people who are on that. So quite excited about that. We had the Premier speak at the end, and we've all heard about the $50 million contribution to the Malahat. She also made mention at the end of her speech, and I haven't heard anything about this in the media, in regards to the BC ferries being retrofitted to use LNG, or liquid natural gas. So some interesting comments there. And other contacts that I made during the conference was the president and the editor of Douglas Magazine, Salt Magazine, and Yam Magazine. They're all one and the same. Salt is a magazine about Vancouver Island that is geared towards the Calgary target audience. I guess the idea is to draw investors and people to move here. Douglas is a Vancouver Island business magazine, and I talked to them both about doing some features on the city of Parksville and our businesses here. So looking forward to that. It was a great conference, and I have tons and tons of notes, as I usually do, so if anybody's interested in learning more about what we covered there, see me. The next thing that I wanted to bring up under new business, I just wanted to give council that I will be bringing forward a motion at the next council meeting. I'm still in the process of doing all my research, but it's come together very well. You might have heard about pop-up libraries, or little libraries as they are. These are small, attractive little houses or little buildings, if you will, that are on posts. The idea behind it is that you take a book or you give a book, but they're proving to be very popular in bringing sense of community to public spaces. People have really taken ownership of them. They currently have 3 in Qualicum Beach. These are all over Vancouver. I'm looking to approach the school board and the library, and possibly even the Parksville Downtown Business Association. And so you'll see more coming forward with my motion about pop-up libraries, and I hope that you'll support that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving along, Councillor Neufeld.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. Just to follow up on what Councillor Lefebvre was saying, as far as the MAC and the OAC, I attended the meeting this afternoon, and at that meeting there was no discussion as far as the board was concerned. They're looking for volunteers. They're looking at various things. That basically was a brainstorming session for the group, and there were approximately 80 people who showed up, and it was really interesting. In fact, they drew some analogies between what had happened before and what is required now. And there was one gentleman, Jim Varney, who was there, and I think Councillor Lefebvre knows this gentleman. And Jim was the director, at least the, I guess, executive director or the president of the organization 12, 15 years ago, when in fact it was running at $95,000 to $100,000 a year. That was the cash flow, and it was a very viable organization. How it has changed, I don't know, but in fact what they're going to have to try and do is come back and bring that back. And so there were a lot of ideas, and they did focus on the business aspect of it. They did see the requirement to not only look at it as an artistic process and an artistic benefit, but in fact to look at it in a fashion that had to pay for itself, could not rely on grants from the city or from elsewhere, but had to in fact be a viable organization that had benefit. So they're going forward with that. Unfortunately, I was not able to stay till the end, but they had not elected any directors by the time I left, and they will be doing so, as mentioned by Councillor Lefebvre, within the next 2 weeks. So that was one thing. With respect to Councillor Paul Davidson, really interesting. Some people that were involved in animation and doing things on an internet basis and a fun basis for people around the world. Pixton Comics was planning on moving from Victoria, at least from Parksville to Victoria. And in fact, they had it set up. They had their businesses going and this type of thing. And at the last moment, they decided to pull out and come back to Parksville. They found that the cost, the work that they were doing could in fact be done from here, and there was a group of people that they felt comfortable with, and it was really interesting. They made the decision to move, and then they rescinded that decision. And so there are people that are staying. Once they look at what they think is greener elsewhere, they come back and say, no, this is still the community within which they wish to work and live, and rather than going into a large city environment. So something to think about. As well as that, last week on Saturday, I attended the AGM of the Parksville and District Historical Society, and I did that as a member, and I wanted to see what, in fact, would occur, particularly given the ouster of the prior board a year ago. It was a very civil situation. It was well conducted. There were some issues with respect to the presentation of financial data, but really interesting. Although a couple of the old board members from over a year ago were there, it was a case that the present board is doing a pretty reasonable job, and they were quite happy as far as the group was concerned with respect to the general performance over the course of the year. So there was one further thing. There is a toy drive, 5th annual toy drive by Tinamera, and there's a breakfast and this type of thing on November 27th. And all you have to do is come up with a toy and an unwrapped toy, and go out and have a nice breakfast at Tinamera, and it would be appreciated. So that there are various things that are occurring for the benefit of our community. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other members of council before I jump into these items? Okay, so we'll jump into these items then. And I'll try to make this as brief as possible. There's 3 things I wish to discuss with you. The first and foremost is just a recap of our town hall meeting, and I'm curious to see if you all felt as positive as I did coming out of that meeting. Regardless of the items that were discussed, although they were both, I would think, potentially quite controversial, and there were certainly some differences of opinion, I just have to say that I was just so enamored and impressed with the crowd and their openness and their willingness to sort of discuss this in just a very high level, and it was probably the easiest meeting I've ever chaired or had the privilege to chair, and I hope that we can continue to do those kinds of meetings in the future. And I'm not going to throw out topics right now, but I wanted to know if council felt the same way. Yeah, I think everyone agrees, eh? Yeah, I mean, I thought we were lucky it was foggy, because if it wasn't foggy, we probably would have spilled out well over the capacity of that room, and it just seemed like we had exactly the crowd that we could hold, and it was just a really interesting evening. All right, carriage houses. Council is aware, perhaps folks in the gallery are not, we had some concerns expressed to us around a carriage house that's in the process of being constructed. I believe it's off of Foster. And so now it's been some time, I believe, since we had originally introduced policies to allow for carriage homes, and I'd had some discussions with our Director of Community Planning on this, and of course with the citizens that were concerned, and there was 4 individuals. The suggestion was that perhaps now would be an appropriate time to review our policies, because a few have been constructed, and looking at this site myself, and I know other members of council have had opportunity to look, it does seem like that could have maybe been approached differently and perhaps with a more positive result. So I would like to float the idea of a motion to come forward, essentially directing staff to conduct a review of our policies around carriage homes and then report back to council to see about what, if anything, there is to change or look at. So is someone prepared to make that motion? Councillor Powell, seconded by Councillor Neufeld. Discussion on that motion. Go ahead, Councillor Greir.
Thank you, Your Worship. How many complaints have we had?
In this particular case, based on this, I think I just mentioned it, about 4 individuals came forward, although some are expressing concerns from the perspective of their neighbors as well.
Okay. Not very many.
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that actually the carriage house program's probably been quite positive and well received. But I think, you know what, like anything, after we've been putting something in place for a while, probably a review is a good idea. That's my perspective. All right, any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. All right, moving on. The only other one, I've sent you a letter. I know most of you probably have not yet had opportunity to read it because I only dispatched it about 5 o'clock today. Essentially, it's from the Friends of Foster Park. I know we've had some discussion around that, and it relates to the cancellation of both the pumpkin walk this year as well as the Easter egg hunt that they conduct on an annual basis. I've had some meetings with them, and what they've essentially said, and it's reflected in the letter, is that, first of all, since that cancellation, there's been a big outcry in the community, and I can appreciate that. I've attended both those events. They're very, very well attended. Essentially, for them, it's becoming an issue from an insurance perspective, and they're hoping that the city might consider working with them to address that issue. And if we can address that issue, then they would likely very much want to reestablish both those events next year. So what I'm looking for is a motion directing staff to perhaps engage with the Friends of Foster Park and come back to council with some options, perhaps even a policy around how the city might be able to sponsor this event in a way that it alleviates some of their insurance concerns. So Councillor Powell is prepared to make that motion. Councillor Lefebvre is seconding. Is there any discussion? Go ahead, Councillor Powell-Davidson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we're going to have to be a little more generic than that. I agree with you. The Friends of Foster Park is a worthwhile organization, and their events are fabulous. But if we start looking at taking on sponsorship of events, I think we're going to get, we'll put the doors wide open. I think we're going to get a lot of nonprofit organizations that come to us to put on events, and they have to deal with the same insurance things. So I'm not suggesting that we don't look at this. In fact, I'm suggesting the contrary. We definitely should look at this, but I don't think we should just look at it from the perspective of Foster Park. I think we need to maybe review the whole insurance policy and how we can work with our community organizations so that the cost of insurance doesn't make it prohibitive for them going forward on their events, because we definitely need these events in the community, okay? We definitely need those events in the community. And perhaps the way we've got this set up with the insurance and maybe some of our other criteria, maybe it's time to review that.
Well, it's interesting because your comments echo the conversation that I was having today with our CAO, and you're absolutely right. So we have to think about the big picture here and the impacts. And you'll note I mentioned the word policy. It may be that we need to develop a policy that identifies in what sorts of circumstances and situations we might provide some benefit to ensure certain events carry forward. But it is definitely a discussion that will have to be had in more detail again when it comes back. So I think the motion that's been presented would essentially bring back a report that did you write down my motion there? That I didn't actually make, but Councillor Lefebvre made? Go ahead, Mr. Manson.
If I may, Your Worship, what I was going to inform the Deputy Corporate Officer.
You could tell us the end of the meeting, eh, ladies and gentlemen? Carry on.
Was basically that we would come back with options for a policy. I wasn't even going to go into the Foster Park part of it. It is a policy that you need. As we discussed, the issue is the cost of liability insurance for these organizations to go forward. If it's a city-sponsored program, they are covered. So the Friends of Foster Park would be covered right now if they had gone forward with a city-sponsored initiative. The issue is the exposure that the city would then have from a liability perspective if somebody was to get injured or hurt. In the past, councils addressed that by having these groups name the city as an insured, so that if something were to happen, the person would first of all go to that group's insurance before they came to us. If those groups don't have that insurance, then they would come directly to us, which potentially has the consequence of increasing our rates.
That is the potential there. And that's what we'll have to look at in further detail within that policy.
And I guess the policy initiative is that it's pretty obvious, Friends of Foster Park and that sort of thing. But there are lots of other special use permits requests that come in from not only not-for-profit but also for-profit organizations. Where's the line that council wants to draw as to which ones they're prepared to support and which ones aren't? So that's what we'll be looking at and providing options and possible recommendation for your review.
Very good. I mean, there are alternatives. You could provide a grant so they could purchase their own, but it still raises the same issue. So who would you provide that to, and who wouldn't you provide that to? So we clear on the motion then, and the intent of the motion? Okay, so any further discussion on this particular matter? I see two hands, but I think Councillor Lefebvre got you there, and then you're next, Councillor. Oh, okay.
Very quickly, thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Powell-Davidson's comments. When I think of, and I see that Mr. Metcalf sitting here tonight, when I think of all of the requests we get, starting in the early spring rather, for all of the activities in the park, if liability insurance rates are going up, I can imagine. I mean, there must be what, 50 different events that are going on from May through to September, October. So that's big business.
It is. So that was just. Okay, very good. I'm going to call it then. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. That's my three. I don't think anyone else has any new business, so let's move on to adjournment. And I need a mover and a seconder. I see Councillor Lefebvre as mover and Councillor Greir as seconder. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We stand adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.